What's up, everyone? Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Erica Stark, the Executive Director of the National Hemp Association and the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council. Hello, Erica Stark. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I did want to mention before we jump into things that you and I share something in common in terms of we have ties to Pennsylvania. Mine not as extensive as yours are, but I did go to college in Pennsylvania, so it's a great state.
Where'd you go?
I went to Bucknell University.
Nice.
In Lewisburg, PA, which is such a great town. So many beautiful things outdoors to do there, except for the winter, of course, when it snows 8 months out of the year.
Yeah, you gotta take the good with the bad.
Are you a Pennsylvania native or?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Born and bred.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again for being on. For those of you who do not know who Erica Stark is, she's the Executive Director of the National Hemp Association, as well as the National Director for the Pennsylvania Hemp Industry Council. So, Erica, before we jump into some specific topics, why don't you just give the audience a sense of who you are and your background and how you got into the hemp industry and what you're doing within these organizations.
Okay. Well, it started out, my roots are in activism. That's how I entered the industry. I went to a rally that was, for legalization. And that's where I met the man who would become my husband. So I started volunteering with him and helping him organize events and do some flyers and stuff like that. And then we decided that we wanted to get hemp legislation introduced in Pennsylvania. And it just so happened that my state senator was the minority chair of the Agricultural Committee in the Senate. So we went to her and we pitched her on introducing a bill, and she agreed. And we did a big event at I'm sure you're familiar with the Pennsylvania Farm Show. Mm-hmm. So at the farm show, we did a press event and announced the introduction of the hemp bill. And then ultimately we got it passed unanimously in one legislative cycle, which is pretty impressive for Pennsylvania to get bipartisan support on anything.
Right. And what year was this again?
That was 2016 that it passed. Yeah, because this is our fourth year of growing. We had it introduced in 15 and it passed in 16. I don't know. Especially now with coronavirus, my dates and my concept of time is like all befuddled.
Understandable. No worries. Yeah. I asked that question because the federal farm bill was passed in 2018. So it sounds like Pennsylvania was really ahead of the game in terms of seeing the opportunity for the industrial hemp market.
Yeah, we definitely used the passage of the 2014 Farm Bill as our platform to promote it, because at that point in time, we were no longer asking the state to defy federal law. We were asking them to come in alignment with what was current federal law, which allowed for pilot programs. So for the first few years in Pennsylvania, the program started out really small, with a lot of limitations, and now we're at, we were prepared with a few years under our belt. So when the 2018 Farm Bill passed, we were prepared to go to full commercialization.
Mm-hmm. And that's a perfect segue into my first question, in that since the federal Farm Bill was passed in 2018, what does the Pennsylvania industrial hemp market look like today compared to other states?
It's similar to other states in that it's still primarily CBD or cannabinoid focused, like much of the country is. We went from the first year we had less than 50 acres to, I think last year we had like 4,000. We have not been told yet what the acreage is going to be for this year. So it's going to be interesting to see how the impacts of the market flood that happened last year is going to impact the number of acres that are grown this year. That's not really unique to Pennsylvania. That's kind of across the board. Where I think we have a little bit of an advantage over other states that are just recently getting involved is that we likely have more processors on board than other states do, because there's been that few years of time to have experience and infrastructure built.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that has been one challenge that almost every guest on this podcast has echoed, in that the processors, right? The bottleneck where these farmers are not easily, because it's hard work, but they're very it's easy for them to pivot and grow the hemp plant at a massive scale, but to get those plants processed and extracted with the oils and whatnot, that's a whole other ballgame. So you're saying that there are established processing plants in Pennsylvania that can handle that type of massive load?
We do. Well, when you say massive load, that's sort of muddies the water a little bit, because as you know, I'm sure, in 2019 across the country, the markets really flooded and there was way more supply than there was demand. So the fact that you have facilities that can actually process it doesn't mean they're actually buying it. And that's one of the major challenges, and it's where I've seen a lot of farmers and cultivators struggle, is that they did too much too fast and they sort of planted it and prayed that they'd be able to find somebody. And I know that there's a whole lot of people who are still sitting on 2019 crop that have not been able to successfully sell it yet. So I do encourage everybody, especially now, we've seen a kind of a perfect storm of obstacles, so to speak. We had the oversaturation of the market, which made the prices drop very significantly in 2019. And we've had the impacts of COVID-19, which have impacted a lot of people looking to get in the industry, not only because a lot of processing facilities were not considered essential businesses and were shut down for a period of time, but the same financial struggles that we've all faced with having to deal with the pandemic. So it's a lot of people are struggling, and a lot of people, it's expensive to plant cannabinoid hemp. It's a lot less expensive to plant it for fiber or grain as far as your input costs go, but the markets just aren't there yet because the infrastructure is really lacking on processing for fiber and grain. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out this year. And I'm sure it's come across your radar too, that a lot of the bigger players in the space have declared bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And so some of the smaller companies have been struggling, and even some of the larger companies are going to be struggling. So I really feel like it's in the industry's best interest to maybe just pull back a little bit. Anybody that seriously wants to get involved should get involved, but they should really start small. Plant a couple of acres and make sure that they understand the cultivation best practices, can find the best cultivars for their particular region, to make sure that they understand the compliance issues and how important testing is, and understand the new federal requirement for THC testing. Because in 2019, many states opted to not go with the federal regulations because of the total THC threshold, and it was just too much too fast for a lot of states. So they opted to remain under their state's 2014 pilot programs, which some states tested just Delta 9 as opposed to total THC. But the reality is total THC is the federal requirement and will be moving forward. So people need to have that time to make those adjustments to make sure that they can remain compliant. So, on top of the fact that we're seeing a whole lot of people get into the industry that aren't traditional farmers, and just sort of don't really know what they're getting themselves into. It's not just as easy as buying a seedling or a seed and throwing it in the ground and make tons of money. There's some serious risks that go along with the rewards that can come with it.
Right. And there is that misconception, right, of this green rush effect. And especially these farmers that are seeing, hey, I've been farming, various crops for years and we have experience. We can easily do this. But to your point, without the infrastructure in place, it makes it more challenging. And like you said, a lot of farmers have suffered the consequences of the 2019 season because they're still sitting on that crop, right? And I think you mentioned, so, for the people listening, there's no waste with the hemp plant, right? Because you can use the fiber, the biomass to produce even a non-consumable materials. So you're saying even that's a bottleneck because those types of processing plants aren't very well established, or there's not enough of them to fulfill the demand. Is that right?
Yes, but it's also a little bit confusing for some people because while it's true that you can use the whole plant, if you're specifically growing hemp for cannabinoids, you're typically growing it more in a horticultural environment where your plants are further spaced apart and they're bushy and you have that really big thick stem in the middle. That's not really conducive for using it for fiber. Now, there may be some ancillary instances where you can, use it for biochar or, chopping it up for organic soil amendments and things of that nature, but it's not like a fiber variety that's used for technical fibers or textiles or any of the more common things that we think of for using fiber. Now, if you're growing hemp for fiber or grain specifically, you in turn can also extract cannabinoids from those plants, but they have a much lower ratio. Like the average fiber varietal is only going to have 2% CBD as opposed to the varietals that, have 10, 12% CBD content. So you would have to process a whole much larger volume to get the same amount of CBD as you would get from a specific CBD varietal. And they're also cultivated very differently. Like I said, the cannabinoid plants are typically planted further apart. They're shorter and bushier, whereas fiber and grain crops are more like a traditional row crop like corn or soy.
Right.
You're talking about how farmers feel about getting into the business. It does sort of depend on what they're used to. If they're a vegetable farmer, yes, moving to CBD is going to be probably pretty easy for them. If they're a row cropper, then fiber and grain is going to be better suited to the equipment and the type of planting that they're used to. So what's good about it is there's something for everybody, but on the other hand, we do have some significant infrastructure to be built before fiber is really viable as an alternative crop for farmers. And on the CBD and cannabinoid side, we really do have to let the markets even themselves out. And farmers need to make sure that they have a contract or at least a good idea of who their market is and who they're going to sell to before they invest several $1,000s per acre to get the plants in the ground.
Mm-hmm. And it keeps coming back to what you're saying about infrastructure. So would you say from the NHA's perspective that is one of the most important issues that y'all are trying to advance within the industrial hemp industry? And if not, or if so, what other issues are important to the NHA at this point?
Well, again, we almost look at hemp, cannabinoid versus fiber and grain as kind of two kind of separate issues. So while there's still some need for more infrastructure for the extraction side of things, there is a significant amount of that infrastructure in the United States already. And that's not the source of the supply and demand problem. It's not like I think that if there was all of a sudden, 200 more processors in the United States, that they were going to buy all of the backlog of biomass that farmers have accumulated. Because as you know, we still have regulatory issues with CBD from the FDA. So it's still in that quasi-legal gray area in a lot of places. So we are focusing kind of on that side of it as well, to try to get reasonable regulations in place, and then the markets can expand more. But I think we probably have come close to hitting a point where there's so much, even crude oil and CBD extract products that are on the market right now, that it's an over demand. It's not just the biomass itself. So until we know that CBD can be added as a food ingredient and be marketed and sold as a dietary supplement, and that you can go to, you know, major retail outlets and purchase it, the demand is, well, it remains to be seen how that's going to play out. So regulatory side, it's important to get FDA to bite the bullet and just do it, because we need a regulatory framework. On the fiber and grain side, it is the actual infrastructure itself, specifically decortication, that is severely lacking and is what's preventing us from going to farm to factory. Because the farmers can grow it, the manufacturers want to use the raw materials, but the decortication facilities that actually take the plant and break it down into its component parts that the manufacturers want, that's what doesn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about the NHA being one of the leading nonpartisan hemp advocacy groups, y'all meet, I would assume, with almost every department at the federal level, right, to talk about this stuff. So how do those conversations go when it comes to, you know, your example of CBD being accepted within the FDA's approval, and even the discussions of cannabis and THC being removed as a Schedule I drug? I mean, what is their viewpoint at the federal level on all this stuff, and do they see the economic and medicinal benefits from the plant?
Yes, and it is, working with government is interesting, and especially in these times, it's very interesting, because there isn't too much that everybody can get together and agree on. But hemp is one of those things. But when it comes to the THC side of things, not so much. There still is a pretty strong partisan divide in the acceptance of cannabis as a whole. So as the National Hemp Association, we do try to keep all of our conversations with legislators and government agencies very hemp specific. While I have my personal views on legalization of cannabis as a whole, as an organization, we stick to hemp. But it's been very interesting, you know, like the 2018 Farm Bill really impacted a whole lot of government agencies. Agencies that I personally just, never, you think of, USDA and FDA are, obvious that they've been impacted by the change in legality. But thinking about Treasury and the changing to the banking rules and regulations, the Department of Justice and the DEA and their involvement in it, the imports and exports, and there's just so many agencies that have been affected, and it's taking them quite some time to all get on the same page and figure out how they're approaching it. Now, in many ways, their jobs would have been much easier if they would have just descheduled cannabis as a whole instead of trying to segment it out. But that's not the reality of it. So,
someone snap, you think? I mean, do you think, especially in an election year, and I'm not saying which candidate or what, but I think even in future elections, will someone understand why are we working so hard to, dissect this plan and regulate it at so many different layers when it's all one thing, and we should treat it as one thing in different capacities? Do you think that'll ever happen?
It will eventually happen, but the other aspect to it that you have to understand that throws the monkey wrench into the whole thing is that we can't just look at ourselves. We have to look at what the rest of the world is doing and how they're approaching it as well. So if we were to just deschedule cannabis as a whole and not have different categories for hemp and high THC marijuana, we'd have problems with imports, with exports in particular, because other countries regulate CBD differently. And we're even seeing some issues now with some places in the EU and wanting to have it at 0.2% instead of 0.3.
Which is impossible because the plant naturally has THCA, correct? So there's really no way virtually to remove THC from the hemp plant in totality.
I'm sure there's geneticists that are working on that, but yes, it's difficult. I mean, it's even difficult to find varieties now that are compliant with the new USDA rules as far as total THC content. Well, I shouldn't say that. I should say it's hard to find plants that you can allow to go to full maturity that remain compliant. So these are, but this industry, if I've learned anything over the last 6 years, is that it's extraordinarily resourceful and inventive, and will find a way to make it work.
Mm-hmm. I had a guest on the previous episode, and she was granted one of the first licenses to have an edible company in Denver, Colorado, right? When the THC recreation boom was first happening. And what she kind of told me, and what I got from that conversation, along with other things, was that there's this divide between the recreational THC group and the industrial hemp group, which I get in some capacity, right? There's a lot of stigma with THC. It's a Schedule I drug. There's a stereotype to being a stoner, the Cheech and Chong kind of thing. But the people within the recreational THC market have gone through a lot of learning lessons, it seems like, in terms of keeping up with regulations and labeling laws that the USDA and the FDA keep throwing at them and changing on a regular basis. So what are your views on these two groups working together instead of kind of holding the ball from one another and saying, I'm not sharing this information?
Well, it's challenging, but it's not true that USDA or FDA is putting any regulations on THC products because they're federally illegal. So those are state regulations, which is part of the problem, is that the legality of THC products varies so widely from state to state. Some states have adult use and medical, some states have medical, some states have nothing. But the divide between the high THC cannabis and hemp, I mean, it even goes deeper than that, because when you talk about particularly fiber and grain processing, there's a cross-pollination risk to marijuana growers. So there are a lot of reasons why there are issues there.
What about indoor grows?
Right, but most people are not going to grow hemp indoors. I mean, there are some people that do, but the vast majority of hemp is grown outdoors.
Oh.
And because it's a lot cheaper, the plants grow bigger and faster. And, that's just, and I think even most of the people that grow cannabis indoors mostly do it because that's what their state mandates that they do. Like in places like California and other places that are allowed to grow outdoors, people grow outdoors. So with hemp, it's almost all outdoors, except for propagation of seeds and, mother plants for clones and things of that nature. Those are obviously indoors, but most of the fields, like you're not going to plant, 100 acres inside.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess it would be the objective of what you're growing for, right? I mean, to your point, if it's fiber, and the plants don't need to be spaced out in a certain way, and you're just cultivating it for the fiber and the actual stock of the plant, then outdoor would make sense. But if you're growing for cannabinoids and you really need to make sure that those trichomes are curated and taken care of, you probably want to think about maybe an indoor greenhouse grow.
Well, yes, and there are situations, particularly if you're cultivating it for smokable flower. But most of the farmers that I deal, particularly here in Pennsylvania, it's all outdoors.
It's all outdoors.
Yeah. I mean, and actually, we actually have minimum acreages here too. And now you can grow in a greenhouse, and I think you have to maintain at least 300 plants or something like that in order to be able to get your.
Got you.
Now, so yes, but you're right. Depending, and that's kind of what the beauty of hemp is that there is a business model that works for everybody. If you want to go down the route of having, premium smokable flower and worry about the terpenes and the flavors and, nicely trimmed buds and things like that, doing it smaller and in a more controlled environment like a greenhouse definitely is the way to go. But if you're a vegetable farmer, you're probably going to grow it outdoors like you do tomatoes or, other crops like that. And if you're a row farmer, you can do that as well. So there is a little bit of something for everybody, and I really hope it stays that way.
Right. Yeah, so at least they have options, right, and they're not mandated by a state to say you have to grow in this way. I agree with you there for sure. So that actually brings up a good segue. So, talking about the risks of growing, especially let's say outdoors, right? From my understanding, in the industrial hemp market, there is no available crop insurance. There's no insurance available for these farmers.
That's not true.
It's not true?
No, that's not true. There's federal crop insurance and there's private crop insurance.
Okay, so explain that to me because I was not aware of that. So tell us about those.
So the pilot program for the federal crop insurance come out for the 2020 growing season. And I believe it's in 16 states and most counties within that state. It is the first year for it, so it's not fully nationwide yet because they have to sort of get a year under their belt and work out some of the kinks of the program, especially because they got it done in such record time. But yes, our organization worked with the company that developed the federal crop insurance with the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation and got the permission and the go-ahead to create that federal program. So that is up and running for this year. The deadline to apply for it was back in March. But it should be a full program by next year for 2021.
Do you mind going into the specifics of that crop insurance program? Like what all do the farmers get? How are they protected under that?
That's a little bit beyond my area of expertise to fully understand and explain crop insurance. But it is based on a cannabinoid model. They did not separate out fiber and grain from cannabinoid hemp. So it is based on a loss scenario. Exceeding THC levels is not a qualifying event. So basically, it would protect you against adverse weather, hail, and basically it operates the same way as any other crop insurance program runs. With a little bit of difference, you had to have had a permit, I think, for 2 years before you qualified for the federal program, and you also must have a contract. You cannot get coverage if you don't have a contract to sell it, which is different from other crops, and that is something that we do hope to see go away once the program gets further up and running and the markets even themselves out. But for these initial trial runs of it, you do have to have a contract. And then there's the private crop insurance, which has been available last year and more so this year. And there's all kinds of, there's parametric coverage, there's traditional coverage, but it is available, and anybody who's interested is looking for private crop insurance on our website, nationalhempassociation.org. If you go to our business member page, we have them separated by category, and we have a separate category for insurance where you can find several options for getting quotes for crop insurance.
I'm so glad that you clarified that because like I mentioned, I was misinformed. I've been talking to people and that's been one of the challenges that they've been saying is just getting crop insurance to protect these farmers. So it's really, really great to see that the NHA is offering those services. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's expensive. I mean, don't get me wrong, which it's, you know, so it's not going to be for everybody. Ultimately, the federal program will probably be best once they work it out. But like I said, having to have a contract is kind of a deal breaker for a lot of people.
Right. Well, I mean, and you should have a contract in place. To your point earlier, I mean,
Yes.
Slow, right? I mean, don't jump into this thing head first where you don't have contracts in place and you don't have that supply chain to ensure that you're making the return on investment. So
Right. Nobody that's planting for the first time should plant more than they're willing to lose. It's just, there's, you know, not to be a naysayer or doom and gloomy, but it's just practical reality. You need to start small. I mean, I've seen people have everything go perfect and they had a beautiful crop, and then when they harvested it, they didn't dry it properly and it got all molded and destroyed. You know, or people who had beautiful growth and they didn't test it soon enough and it ended up spiking and being hot. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong. I mean, and there's a lot of things that can go right. And when everything goes the way it's supposed to, it's profitable. There's nothing more enjoyable than being in a hemp field. It's very rewarding on a lot of levels, but it's just, you know, I just hate to see people lose. You know, I want everybody to win, and slow and steady is what wins the race in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's really, I love your importance and focus on education and really helping not only the farmers but everyone in the industry succeed. And that's really the mission of this podcast, Cannabinoid Connect, is to bring experts like you on from different disciplines and talk about your experience and share those that expertise so that people are aware they don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Which brings up, you know, I've done my research and I did read that NHA recently partnered with New Holland, which is a global equipment manufacturer. And basically y'all's mission is to just educate, right? And help these farmers and others succeed. So do you want to talk about that partnership and the education that y'all are providing?
Yeah, so up until 2019, almost all of the events that NHA participated in were more traditional cannabis CBD type shows. But through our partnership with New Holland, now a lot of the events that we were scheduled to do this year have been canceled or otherwise not happening due to COVID. But we've made a shift to go to more actual farming events, where we're talking to actual farmers rather than kind of going to industry events and preaching to the choir. So for new people that are looking to get into it, it's been very beneficial. But the eye to it, to be honest, is more towards looking for fiber and grain production, which is where the partnership with New Holland is going to be very important as far as development of specific equipment for large acreage farms that can do the harvesting and capture all parts of the plant so none of it is wasted. So you can let the plant go to seed, so you harvest the seed and you get the full length of the stalk. And then even that you can save the leftover leaf and flower material that can be used for CBD extraction if that's what you want to do. Even the baling equipment has challenges because the hemp plant is so strong. It has a tendency to wrap itself around all of the rotating parts. So New Holland has already actually developed some kits that can be installed on existing farm equipment to make it more suitable for hemp. So they're really committed to being a leader in this industry, and particularly on the row crop side. They have some solutions for CBD production as well, but the focus is going to primarily be on fiber hemp. And actually, we're going to be looking to, we're going to be planting about 14 to 15 acres on their corporate campus in Pennsylvania this year. Actually, later this week, we should be getting the seeds in the ground so their engineers can have firsthand look at the plants, and they have enough that they can test different things to try to move the industry forward. Because it is as much as I love and support the cannabinoid portion of the industry, I do really feel like fiber and grain is the future of hemp, just because of how many things it's good for. And when we want to have, farmers in the Midwest be able to participate, where to them 1,000-acre farm is really small. We really have to be able to harvest and decorticate vast numbers of acreages, so the United States can make car parts out of hemp. So we can make building products. So, we can lead in these fiber industries, making paper and bioplastics and all of the things that hemp is good for outside of just the medicinal and wellness portion of it, which is significant. Don't get me wrong. I'm not denigrating it in any way, but fiber is where the most farmers will be benefited. And it's also where, frankly, the economy and the environment is going to be benefited. Carbon sequesters more CO2 than any other commercial crop. And when we're looking to have an impact on climate change, we need to see hemp be planted in the tune to like millions of acres. So our goal is over the next
it takes in, correct? I mean, the CO2 amounts that when you plant hemp or cannabis is incredible compared to other plants. Isn't that right?
Yes, it's the most of any commercial crop. And then, so particularly for, and it's particularly when you're row cropping, because you have like really big canopies of hemp, they're not spaced apart, that there's no light touching the ground. So it's pulling toxins out of the soil while it's pulling CO2 from the atmosphere. But then what's really beautiful about it is that carbon gets permanently bonded to the fiber. And that fiber, particularly when you look at like building hempcrete, will continue to sequester more CO2 for like an additional 100 years. So the environmental benefits of growing hemp on a truly massive scale is not only going to benefit climate change in the actual cultivation, but it's also going to be beneficial to the environment in the end products that we use, when we're not cutting down trees to make paper, when we're replacing some of the wood that we use with hemp, when bioplastics are mainstream, and so single-use plastics made out of hemp is like the holy grail of where we need to get to. But even right now, there's plastics that can be made out of hemp that are biodegradable, and that's where we see the major impacts coming. But that's also where we need to have a lot of investment made in the industry to get that infrastructure up and running.
Yeah. I mean, you and I share the same viewpoint. I couldn't agree more with you in terms of the environmental benefits of just really focusing on the fiber industries. And not only that, but then the economic impact of how we can replace so many industries that are so costly. And time take a lot of time. They're time consuming, right? I mean, to plant a tree and let it grow and then cut it down for paper or for cotton, it takes a lot longer to yield than a 90-day, hemp crop, or, whatever the timing is, whether you're planting indoor or outdoor. But what I am weary about is I don't want the focus to shift from the medicinal properties either, simply because there's 150 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, and we've only scratched the surface with identifying 15 of them. So having a balance on both of those sides, I think, is really important. And again, that's where the education comes in. That's where these discussions are very valuable. I think not only for just the general population, but legislators and the people that are in office, to understand the real opportunity here.
Yeah, and I think we're getting there. But like I said, in that regard, you really can almost look at hemp as having two definitive segments of the industry, and just even separating them from row crop versus horticultural cultivation. And it's always going to be the case that the smaller controlled grows are going to be produce better medicine. Because, at least for me personally, if I want medicine, I want it to have been grown organically.
Right.
I want to make sure that it was planted in good soil, because hemp is a hyper accumulator, and anything nasty in that soil, hemp is going to pull up into itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to end up in your final product unless you're really careful. But if you're going to be growing a whole bunch of fiber that's going to be used to make plastics and toilet paper, then maybe I don't care so much.
Right.
And that's sort of like where I think that is the beauty of hemp. And I forget which senator it was. I got to testify at a U.S. Senate Ag Committee hearing last July, and one of the senators, I think it was Senator Bozeman, but I'm not totally sure on that. He asked about the scope and scale of it, and I said something about like hemp is great because it includes everybody. Like if you have a 40-acre farm, or if you have a 10,000-acre farm, and he's like, well, a 40-acre farm is kind of like a large garden. And I'm like, well, maybe in Montana it is, but in Pennsylvania we have lots of smaller farms of that size. So there really is something for everybody, and I don't think there's any risk of there ever being a lack of interest in cannabinoids, because like you said, we're just beginning to scratch the surface, and already I've seen a whole bunch of people that saw the dramatic drop in CBD prices that are like, okay, I'm going to grow CBG this year. So as the industry evolves, the science will keep up and keep discovering new things that it's good for. And we'll probably always be behind the 8 ball with the FDA, because we're going to be like, hey, look, CBG can do this and CBC can do that. And the FDA is going to be like, hold on, you can't say that yet. And it's like, well, come on, guys. It's just like, but consumers are getting pretty savvy about it. And if they ever did attempt to take people's CBD away, I think the backlash would be pretty swift and severe.
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually posted a funny video. It was on our Cannabinoid Connect social media channels. It wasn't a video produced by us, but I think Attention was the video, or the media company that posted it. But it was basically a parody video of a commercial that you would see promoting a prescription drug. So how you've got the beautiful photography, and you've got the husband and wife holding hands with the kid, and they're talking about high cholesterol or whatever it is, and then they say side effects may include, and they boom, 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 boom. There's like 20 or 30 of them. The parody was, what if Big Pharma did marijuana ads? And it's hilarious, because it's every side effect that anybody who's had experience with the plant would know, right? Like, oh, I'm happier, I'm more thoughtful, I'm more aware of myself and what I'm saying. My appetite is better, I'm sleeping better, I'm not constipated because I'm not taking opioids anymore. So it's really funny.
It is, but to be fair, like the FDA does have a role to play here. Like to me, like it's one thing if you're an average person and you want to take CBD, and you just want to, and you're willing to self-medicate and trial and error and find what works for you, what the right dosage is, and which varieties have the best effect for you. But if I'm a mom that has a kid with Dravet syndrome, maybe Epidiolex is what I want. Something that has been tested and controlled. And I think because of the lack of clinical trials that we've had, because it's been illegal for so long, there may be drug interactions that we don't know about. And that would go for not just CBD, but for any of the cannabinoids. So I'm certainly for them being free and open to the public to produce products and buy and consume it as they wish. But I'm also very supportive of actual clinical trial research being done to understand what the different cannabinoids can do, and prove it, and prove that, and that's kind of the balance. it's like if you have a kid with Epidiolex, I mean, it's obscene to me that it costs $32,000 a year to buy Epidiolex if you don't have insurance. But on the other hand, regular CBD products, you're probably spending $400 or $500 a month, and there's no insurance coverage for it at all. So to be able to have a prescription grade product that is covered by traditional insurance is a good thing in certain scenarios, and having a nutraceutical that people can go buy off the shelf is positive as well. And we see that in other things, like, let's take something mundane like ibuprofen. You can go buy Advil at any drugstore, but your doctor can give you a prescription for Advil as well at different dosages. And I think that's where we're going to ultimately end up, is that a certain amount of milligrams is going to be allowed as an over-the-counter product, but anything over a certain number of milligrams would be prescription or pharmaceutical grade. And to me, that is kind of the happy medium of both. But I think the big concern is with the popularity of CBD, particularly when people are putting it in gummies and they're putting it in water and they're, putting it in everything. Do we really know what happens to somebody that drinks a pack of CBD water a day and then takes 10 gummies and then uses a tincture? Do we know?
No.
I think the answer is no, we don't know.
No, we don't know. And it's the problem of the over marketing and the hype around the CBD, right? Around some of these cannabinoids. I mean, in some products, you buy gummies, for example, and you're getting more sugar than you are of the actual CBD content itself, right? So to your point, yes, I agree with you, and I agree that it shouldn't be. I don't want you to think that I'm saying willy-nilly that this is the end-all answer and to replace some pharmaceutical drugs. But the fact that cannabis has been listed as a Schedule I drug for so long has just handcuffed everybody in every capacity to learn about it, and so we're behind the eight ball. And when we get and when we get one little inch, right, where they say, okay, now you can extract this one cannabinoid, CBD, everybody's running with it, and no one really has a clear understanding of what it does and the medicinal properties. So I totally get it, and that's why I'm just so adamant about education and trying to wake some of these lawmakers up to say, guys, let's be more open to this plant. Valium is listed as a Schedule IV drug. THC is listed as a Schedule I. That's a little weird to me.
It's all a little weird. I mean, when you really look at it. And the other thing, like the THC part of it aside, which I do agree with you on, but the other thing that I worry about is the synthesizing of cannabinoids. I think if anything, like, I don't want my CBD to be produced in a lab. I want it to be extracted from natural plant material. And if anything, I would think that the pharmaceutical experience with Marinol would prove that a synthesized cannabis molecule does not work the same as the real thing.
Right.
That's one of the things that I want to avoid. I want to avoid seeing synthesized cannabinoids, because not only they're not going to be as effective, but it's also going to take away that business from farmers and average people, not providing a natural product. But I'm also worried about GMOs. Like, I don't want blue hemp. You know what I mean? And that idea has been floated out there. So keeping, and that my hope is that the industry having this number of years to start it, sort of get up and running with pilot programs before we had federal legalization, I think is a good thing, because I think it'll at least delay when big pharma and big ag comes in and tries to dominate the industry. Monsanto, I'm sure, has been eyeing hemp for a very long time. But until it was federally legal, it wasn't worth their aggravation. So I do worry about that, but I think this is where the education comes in. And one of the big problems that consumers have had up until now is that they have no way of knowing where a product came from, how it was produced. There's a whole lot of really great companies out there making superior, outstanding product, and there's a whole lot of snake oil crap out on the market too. And consumers have no way of telling the difference. It's probably one of the biggest questions I get asked. And unfortunately, there is no simple answer to that. So we do have to, while we wait for reasonable regulations, and we might be waiting quite some time for FDA to come out with something reasonable. So in the meantime, we have to encourage people to, do their due diligence and not just buy, a CBD product from the corner vape store and think that they're getting necessarily a good product. They may, but I'm guessing, when you can buy something for $15, it's probably not the best CBD product on the market. But again, this is one of the areas where we've struggled in being able to provide clear guidance to consumers as to what products to gravitate towards and which to stay away from.
It's funny. That was my next question. You said it's one of your most asked questions in that is fraud, right? I mean, with any new emerging industry, there's going to be that snake oil. There's going to be those people that are trying to take advantage of the farmers or the processors, the retail shops. So I know you've already answered it in terms of it's a challenging issue. But is there anything?
Well, so on the consumer side, it's the biggest question I get. But it's also on the other side of that issue, I see more farmers getting screwed by processors than I do processors getting screwed by farmers. So that's another important point for anybody, especially with the requirement. It's a bigger fear of mine with the requirement for federal crop insurance for you to have a contract, because I've seen a lot of farmers get into some really bad contracts. Mm-hmm. Contracts that is too easy for the processor to just bail out of and not make good on, or contracts where the farmer only gets paid when the processor is able to sell it. Most farmers want to put a crop in the ground, they want to harvest it, sell it, and that's it at the end of the day. But that's not necessarily the contracts that they're being offered most of the time. So those are the two. Like, to me, I think the processors are kind of doing okay for the most part when as far as getting screwed over. Like, I don't think anybody's specifically screwing processors over, but farmers are getting screwed over and consumers are getting screwed over. Sure. So those are the two ends of the supply chain that have to be the most diligent in deciding how they want to conduct their business.
Yep, and protected, right? Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, I guess, final question for you is, what does the industry look like when we get to full manufacturing? Ideal world, you wave a wand, and what does the industrial hemp market look like?
To me, my perfect world is going to be, we're going to see a 10% reduction in both corn and soy production. That will all be replaced with hemp. And that we're going to see a whole bunch of manufacturing jobs spring up from the ability to create new products with the hemp fibers. I think another side effect of this pandemic is I think it made us all realize how much we're too reliant on global supply chains, and that we need to be able to be a little bit more self-sufficient. So hemp kind of plays in perfectly with that. So that would be my perfect world on that side. And then it will be where, the small mom and pop farmer that only has, 10, 50, 100 acres is going to have all kinds of different options for cannabinoid production and a lot less regulatory hurdles to jump through. Either because the regulations relax a little bit, and like personally what we're pushing for is for them to just change the sampling requirement, because they don't necessarily have to change the law, but if they allowed the sampling of the plant to be a whole plant composite and not just the top couple inches of flower, that would give farmers a whole lot more leeway in what varietals that they can plant. And that's something that the USDA could do with a snap of a finger. But anyway, so we would see all kinds of small to medium-sized cannabinoid producers, both indoor and outdoor, and even some urban farmers getting in on the action too. So my perfect world is where everybody that wants a seat at the table has one, and everybody can find a business model that works for them, all the while the economy and the environment benefit from it.
Erica, I want to live in your perfect hemp world. That sounds amazing.
We'll get there one day.
We will get there, and it's going to take discussions and education like this to do that. So with that, I want to thank you so much again for your time and being on the show and sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise in this area. Is there anything that you want to leave our audience with? Maybe plug, websites or social media?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we would appreciate anybody who's interested to come check us out at nationalhempassociation.org. We are a nonprofit association. Our only source of revenue is through memberships. And we have a wide variety to choose from, everything from $50 a year to $2,500 a year. We have a wealth of information on our website. We have a really great webinar series that has all kinds of best practices, cultivation best practices, how to select genetics, how to read a certificate of analysis, webinars on crop insurance. And we also have a wide variety of business members on our website that if you are looking to buy a quality product, that you might want to check out some of those businesses. So yes, I'm really terrible at social media. But we do have a Facebook page, and we have a Facebook private group for our members. And our Twitter is at NatHemp, ASSOC. And I know we have an Instagram, and I have no idea what it is.
No worries. I'm
too old for that.
Oh, no problem. We tagged it on Cannabinoid Connect's Instagram, so y'all can find it there. And after this episode, of course, we'll be sharing all that information as well. So
we appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica, and thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye.